because obviously it's a prominent feature of the show, and really to find out how we could adapt the details to be part of a theatrical presentation.
A key feature of the show was to be a massive chandelier which would crash down over the heads of the audience.
We looked at this amazing chandelier and thought, how are we going to get anything like this in, in a small London theatre and make it work? But by looking at the design, and it's made in hoops, which makes it collapsible, which was a godsend to us. So we were able to take those elements and made a simplified design.
The designers worked closely with Hal Prince. But then Lloyd Webber had second thoughts about the showman. His attention now switched to the director of Cats, Trevor Nunn.
Hal was doing a lot of other shows at the time, which, as happens with all of us from time to time, weren't doing terribly well. And so both Andrew and I got a little nervous about whether we'd actually chosen the right man at the right time.
Neither had the courage to tell the Broadway giant alone, so they decided to fly to New York to break the news together.
Nobody turned up from Andrew's side, and there was I left with this legend of the theatre.
I'd worked on it all summer. I'd even gone to Paris and stood on the roof of the Paris Opera House. I don't know how you know this story, because it's a very little-known story. And Cameron, at breakfast, said, how do you know this story?
He told me.
He told you.
But I had to say, look, I've discussed this with Andrew, and I'm afraid we don't wish to proceed.
And I was furious. I thought of it as the first time in a very long career that I had been replaced. Fired might be the word. So I left the breakfast uneaten and had a few scatological things to say and walked back to my office. Called my wife and told her, who was stunned, and handed all my material to my secretary and said, keep this, they'll be back in the next 4 weeks.
What a way to run a business. Spare me these unending trials.
But then Mackintosh's latest musical, Les Miserables, directed by Nunn, opened to poor reviews. Trevor Nunn was fired, and Hal Prince was rehired. Lloyd Webber decided to test the water with a pop single. Richard Stilgoe would pen the words. Only one problem. The Phantom still had no phantom. Steve Harley of the 70s glam rock band Cockney Rebel was asked to sing the song.
I heard it and liked it, and I'd never done a duet. I knew Sarah could sing with an angelic soprano. I was quite happy to give it a crack, as it were.
And that went to #7 in the charts, thanks to a wonderful, as over-the-top as you can get, video by Ken Russell.
Sing once again with me, our strange duet. My power over you.
The relationship really you're seeing on screen is the same as Hannibal Lecter and Agent Starling, only set to music. That's a terrible thought.
A fragrant nosegay from Phantom of the Opera. That was Sarah,
And
of course,
Steve
Sarah
Harley.
Brightman. Steve
Harley
Harley.
the Phantom.
Used to be Cockney Rebel.
That's right, and an amazing turn up for the books.
Suddenly, Steve Harley was the favourite to play the Phantom on stage.
If a theatre's found, Steve, do you think, will you be playing the male part?
They won't tell me.
They won't tell you?
The boss said the other day on radio that I have
an extraordinary chance. So
you're
I'm
on the
living
shortlist
with fingers
then?
and toes crossed. I do want to do it very much.
It became an idea which got fixated on, which we were all talked to, about Steve playing it. Because it was Sarah with Steve, pop hit. Wouldn't that be a good idea?
Slowly all the senses,
Harley was asked to audition in front of the creative team.
helpless to resist the notes I write, for I compose the music of the night.
And did I pass the audition? They phoned my agent the next day and said I had the job.
Finally, they had their Phantom. But then another problem reared its head. The writer had writer's block.
Richard's instinct is to be funny, and he is very funny. And I think The Phantom of the Opera is not meant to be funny. And I think that was the difficulty.
I was saying, OK, I'll go and write it again, writing it again, handing it in, like homework, really. And somebody said, no, that's not what we want. And I, at that point, really didn't know how to make it better.
Then Mackintosh remembered a young, unemployed lyricist called Charles Hart that he'd met at an awards ceremony the year before.
So I told Andrew about Charles, and I said, I think this guy's really good. And Andrew said, well, look, why don't I give you one of the tunes? You give it to him, but don't tell him I wrote it, and let's see what happens.
He gave me a tape of Andrew playing the piano. I went away and stuck it in my cassette player and listened to it a lot. He'd given me absolutely no guidelines as to what the subject matter of the lyric might be. Anything I liked, anything that fitted. You know, for a male, for a female, no guidelines at all.
Think of me fondly when we've said goodbye. Remember me once in a while. Please promise me you'll try.
And he wrote Think of Me, and we went, thanks very much, that's very good.
To take your heart back and be free.
Andrew called me that night and was very lavish with his praise and said, we must work together. And I said, that'd be lovely sometime. I said, I imagine you're quite busy with the Phantom at the moment. And there was a sort of slightly peculiar pause, and he said, well, actually, it's about the Phantom. Well, what are you doing tomorrow at 3? And as it happened, I was unemployed. I was free all week. I was free for the rest of my life. So 3 o'clock the next day was okay. My only commitment at the time was signing on, which was on a Monday at 9.
Now it was Stilgoe's turn to be given the elbow. Once again, Mackintosh was the hatchet man.
By this time I was becoming a dab hand at doing what Verdi and Puccini always did, which is sort of take a bit from here and a bit from there, and you to get a great libretto, you leave no stone, and usually no head unturned.
It was pretty frightening. Seeing your name in the press when you know you haven't written a word, libretto by, you know, I hadn't written any of it.
By May, Steve Harley had been working on the role for 5 months. He'd recorded Music of the Night with the orchestra, but Lloyd Webber had yet to publicly announce him as the Phantom.
And when I said, look, you've got the posters printed, you know, you've offered the role to me, you're negotiating with my agent, all we've got is I's to dot and T's to cross. Why aren't you telling the press? Why isn't this public? And he said, no, I'll pick my moment. If you don't mind, keep it to yourself for the time being.
Help me.
Privately, the bosses were having a change of heart.
You know, he wasn't that experienced an actor. It became obvious to me, and then I obviously discussed it with Hal and with with Andrew, who also came to the same conclusion, that this was